as a historian, I am not a follower of Gandhi. I am broadly, moderately sympathetic towards him. As a historian, what is interesting is how many different dimensions of the human experience he touched.
You may be this great international figure with amazing ideas, but everybody is human also. And when you scrutinize them with a micro lens, all our humanity manifests in all kind of bizarre manners.
Gandhi believed that it was morally wrong to take the life of an innocent person, even if he's a British officer. And he was proved right. Gandhi believed that if you practice violence to achieve freedom, then you will practice violence on your internal rivals. This is an endless debate among historians. Was it unwise to have a Quit India movement in retrospect? So partition could have been avoided maybe in 37, 38, 39. Some romantics think it could have been stopped. It's always easier in hindsight to pass judgment.
Yeah. But not fast forward to today. And in some ways, Gandhi continues to be a fascinating character, continues to be controversial as well, and so on. What are your words to maybe younger generations? Ram, welcome back to second episode.
Thanks, Mukesh.
I think you have written 2 large books, and especially second one, I want to pick it up and show it to our listeners also. This is like 1,000-page book.
Yeah.
And the second volume covers the time of Gandhi since he came back from South Africa and pretty much, till end of his life. But I think when we left it around this point last time, this must have been a pretty big decision for him, also huge change, because he was gone from India for over 20 years.
Yes.
By the time in 1913-14, he decided to come back.
Yeah.
Just did you study what was his thought process? How did he arrive at the decision?
Mukesh, there are 97 volumes of Gandhi's writings. And Gandhi, unlike most famous people, was an unusually frank man. Of course, it is autobiography, which many people have read, but also in his other writings, he would talk freely about what he wanted to do, what his failures were, what he felt his achievements were. He was a very transparent person. But this is one decision which is not explained in writing. So you have to speculate.
Okay.
So there could be 2 or 3 reasons why he came back. The first is that he had led this struggle in South Africa. And the second struggle led to some concessions by the white government. Of course, not full equality. Full equality was to come much later in South Africa for Africans as well as for Indians. But, at least some of the more discriminatory laws were removed. That would be one reason. That a partial success had been achieved. Well, of course, India was his homeland. A second reason could be that his kids were growing up. And he wanted his kids to go to school and mature in their own culture. And the third reason, which I think is unspoken, is that he wanted a larger canvas. So, there were just 150,000 Indians in South Africa. He had proved himself there. He had been there 20 years. He had immersed themselves in their lives, in their struggles. And now he felt maybe there's a burgeoning freedom struggle in India. It's a much larger canvas. It's my country. That is, many million people I can work with, I can influence.
Yeah.
So I think all of this is feeding into his decision to come.
And around that time, do you see in his writings or his public conversations, what do you sense even that time the time for larger independence for India has come is something he was in his lifetime?
So, Mukesh, in his time in South Africa, he's talking about it. So he goes to South Africa in 1893. In 1903, a decade after he reaches South Africa, he starts a journal called Indian Opinion, which we spoke about last time, which is a weekly magazine. So that is, let's say 60-70% about the predicament of Indians in South Africa, 10-15% about global events, and about 20% about what's happening in India. So there you will see about Annie Besant, you'll see about the Swadeshi movement, you'll see references to Tilak, to Dadabhai Naoroji. So he's following to various laws, various problems that Indians in India face. So he always has, though he's working in South Africa, he has one part of 1 year listening to what's happening in his homeland, which is of course true of many diasporic Indians today. So I think he was aware that one day, ek din mujhe wapas jana padega.
But sometime, see, when at the time British Empire was still kind of on the ascendancy, pretty much getting to its peak. And so sometime, these big audacious goals, sometimes you think ki isme sausa lagenge, right? This I'll do my bit, next generation. Versus ki time aa gaya, I can see
that's
there is, light at the end of the road. What was his?
So I think you're right, because he felt, so he comes back when he's 45. he feels I'm not too old. I'm speculating here, but in his mind he must have thought I'm not too old. I have 20 or 30 years of active public life ahead of me, but yet I have experience. I know how to mobilize people. I know how to, all the idea of satyagraha, non-violent resistance. And he says in 1908 and 1909, he gives a speech where he says he's writing to an Indian friend. In fact, if memory serves, he's writing to his Tamil friend G.N. Nattesan. The satyagraha which I'm doing here, which me and my colleagues are doing here, is an idea that will have greater application in India, non-violent mass protest. So he started an ashram already in South Africa working with his hands. He started a newspaper. He's promoting Hindu-Muslim harmony. So many of his ideas are developed. And he's still relatively young, in his mid-40s. Of course, those days life expectancy was not what it is now. But still you could expect another 15, 20 years when you're still physically energetic to do the kind of work that you hope to do.
And so he comes back to India and goes on this grand tour, I think travels in third-class train at that time. And this is also, very interesting because his initial, at least the famous story is, because he was fighting to be in first class, which he was not allowed. And here, after 20 years, by choice, he says, I only want to travel in third class, making quite a statement. What was like how...
You're right. That's a very good point. So, in South Africa, early on, one of the first times he faces racial discrimination is when he comes with a London degree, wearing a suit, and in London he can travel first class, but he can't in South Africa. And over these 2 decades, he starts living a life of a common person with ordinary Indians. He declasses himself, and then he comes back. And I think it's important to remember, again, these things are sometimes not given enough emphasis. His great mentor is Gopal Krishna Gokhale. And when he comes back, actually Gokhale was in London. So before coming back, he goes there to take his advice and then comes via London. And Gokhale tells him, you've been away for 2 decades. You don't know your country. So you must promise me that for a year, you will travel around. That's one thing, get to know your country. And secondly, not make any public statement. Because you do not know your country. You can't lecture your countrymen on what to do and what not to do. So, and he takes that very seriously. So actually his first major public intervention is in Banaras in February 1916, where he makes a famous speech at the BHU. It's more than a year. And in that year, 1915, you just look at his itinerary. He goes everywhere, north, south, east, west. He goes to deeper South India, to Madurai, to Mayavaram. He goes to Banaras. He goes to Haridwar. All of Gujarat, Kathiawar, Kolkata. So, so I think that is something where I think Gokhale's advice was very wise. You want to come back and make an impact on public life, but do you know India? You've been away for 20 years. What do you know except reading books and magazines are not going to give you a kind of first-hand intimate knowledge. And don't say anything. Don't voice unsolicited. So for people today, if I may give a contemporary twist to it, for people today, young people today, not just young people, even older people my generation, social media has liberated. They think it's liberated them. So they're so free with their views on Instagram and X and without studying a subject. So it's very good advice that if you want to make an impact, if you want to comment on something that you feel passionately about, study it carefully through first-hand experience or through reading or through experiment. I think Gokhale's advice was incredibly wise.
Now, there's a timeless advice, but also the fact that he followed up on that. I think I can relate to it in the leadership context. Also, you tell people when you go in leadership role in new company, or spend 3-4 months just listening to people. Don't say anything. Keep your mouth shut, right? Just listen, right? Which is very hard to practice because not that people like to opine and people think, they can very quick read a situation. But it's, I think, every new situation, I think, you better to practice it. But then, he exercises restraint. But then he goes to BHU and makes this very inflammatory speech, right? Yeah. Which also ruffled a lot of feathers which people were not expecting.
Yeah. Because the BHU was inaugurated. And the BHU is now more than 100 years old, and its prime movers were Annie Besant and after Mahatma Gandhi, who and a lot of money was raised. Also, Indian Maharajas, were speaking at the inauguration, and the inauguration was by the Viceroy. And Gandhi was right at the end, like almost the last speaker, because he was expected to speak about his work in South Africa with the diaspora there, fighting for the rights of Indians. Instead of which, he saw these Maharajas in their jewels and their fancy Rolls Royces, and he said, and he said, you're funding this university. What kind of example will you? I'm happy, but what kind of example will you set the students? What if the students will want to emulate you? What will they know about the peasants, the workers, the artisans, the ordinary Indians? How will they use their education to emancipate their own people? And, it's like, it's a terrific speech. I mean, it's like, and Gandhi normally, in most of his language, was quite restrained and refined. He made his point forcefully, but not in a kind of abrasive way. But this is a polemical speech. I mean, this is something that the disjunction between the overdressed Maharajas and how ordinary folks lived. He wanted to tell the students that, and he also something else also. He also said in that speech, it was sometimes overlooked, if there's so much disparity, you will encourage young people to take to violence. And I don't want violence. They'll want to end this injustice very quickly, and they will, take recourse to the bomb and the rifle. But it is a quite remarkable speech and it's, he kind of, in fact, I think my mother, if I remember, the chapter heading in this book is coming out in Banaras. He reveals himself in Banaras. Yeah. For the first time, he comes out in public in Banaras.
Yeah, I think Anna Besant tried to almost make him stop it.
Yeah.
Because it was going.
Yeah. She thought he's embarrassing all the patrons by all of this. Absolutely. Yeah.
But just actually, I'm going to zoom out, Ram, for a minute. We'll go through how the entire, his participation role, etc., in the whole freedom struggle and so on. But when you go through your biography, you see it seems like this is a man who is fighting many battles simultaneously and very complicated. There is on one hand, there's a struggle with Britishers, within Congress itself, so many differing opinions. Then he's trying to shepherd the whole Hindu-Muslim unity in certain direction, allies and enemies, right? The whole untouchability, that's where he also get to a very complicated situation. And then this whole personal, personal spiritual journey where he's trying to, from celibacy to fasting to all kind of diets and so on. Very, very complicated person.
To that list, which is already quite comprehensive, I will add two more things. So, Gandhi, you mentioned untouchability, his campaign to end untouchability. But also not as important to Gandhi, but almost as important, is his concern for the upliftment of women. Because Dalits and women are the two suppressed parts of economically and socially suppressed parts. And he wants to emancipate both, though he pays much greater emphasis on the question of untouchability. Patriarchy a little less, but it's there. Then you rightly pointed to his lifelong quest for Hindu-Muslim harmony, because India is a land of many religions and one religion cannot dominate. Yeah. But India is also a land of many languages. So, whether it's Bengali speakers, Tamil speakers, Odia speakers, he wants all of them to come into the freedom struggle. And before him, the freedom struggle is mostly conducted in English. And then urges nationalists to start newspapers in their own languages. So I think so. That's also it is. It is a completely, he is juggling many balls at the same time. So he's a freedom fighter. He's a social reformer. He's a prophet of religious harmony. And then, as you say, he's trying to perfect his own life, trying to live more simply, work with his hands, khadi, train a group of dedicated, selfless, committed volunteers through his ashram. Then he has the most, in some ways, the most strangest aspect of his life is his obsession with celibacy. And again, the chapter in my book is called The Strangest Experiment, where he tries to...
And I think his son's also about this.
I think his son's about it also. And again, he's writing about them. In English, in Gujarati, and in Hindi. So yes, I mean, it's a life. You see, the thing about Gandhi is that as a historian, I'm not a follower of Gandhi. I recognize his profound influence on the world, and I'm broadly, moderately sympathetic towards him. I'm not a devotee or it's not a hagiography. But as a historian, what is interesting is how many different dimensions of the human experience he touched. Yeah. How many people who had an impact in India and South Africa and in England? I mean, look at today, Trump, any famous leader, Modi, Trump, Sunak, Angela Merkel, really they only know their own country. They've only had an impact on their own country. And how many politicians, who go beyond politics to social reform, to religion, to culture, to language. So as a historian, Gandhi is endlessly fascinating because he touches so many different worlds. That's really what is... regardless of whether you approve of what he does or don't approve what he does, or approve of something, don't approve some other things. It's just that it's an epic scale. His life is lived on an epic scale.
And I was wondering, what is the enabler of that? Say, if you look at again 1914 till 1948, just 34 years. 34 is not that long of a time. So much happens, 2 world wars, India does get, its independence, and all these things are playing out. Just all this bandwidth issue also, like to think about these things, participate, have some authentic voice, just how is he managing stuff?
So I think the great hero, that's a very good question. The great hero of this book, apart from Gandhi, is his secretary, Mahadev Desai. So, when we talk about Gandhi, you think of the characters around Gandhi, So, if someone with some rudimentary knowledge of history, who's read a bit, knows about his great political colleagues, Nehru and Patel, and Azad and Sarojini Naidu, they know about his great political rivals, Ambedkar and Jinnah. They know about someone like Bose, who was both a colleague and a rival, But Mahadev Desai, who's the most important person in Gandhi's life, who's, as I say somewhere, his head, heart and hand, who was his secretary from 1917 to 1942, who was a brilliant man, who was recording all that he did, advising him, was as fluent in Gujarati as he was in English, was much more conversant with international affairs, was Gandhi's emissary traveling around. You talked about it, there's a trouble in the Congress. Then Mahadev would leave the ashram in Ahmedabad to go and meet Nehru in Allahabad or Bose in Kolkata and then try to resolve all of this. He was an extraordinary figure. And he was completely self-effacing. And because he was with Gandhi all the time, there are not that many letters. You know his relationship with Nehru or with Bose because they were far away, they were exchanging letters. Gandhi and Nehru, Gandhi and Bose, Gandhi and Ambedkar. And I think Mahadev Desai was, and Kasturba, these two, were absolutely critical in his life, and it all enabling him to do the kinds of things he did. He had other associates, other colleagues. I mean, that says he was like any great leader, he is often made by his or her assistants and, colleagues and enablers. But Mahadev is really a very remarkable figure. And, if I believe that if he died when he was 50, he had a heart attack. If in 1942, 5 years before independence. I mean, he is in many ways, that several friends of mine, when they read this book, said they wept, when reading about his death in jail, and I got to know about Gandhi's dependence on Mahadev and Mahadev's extraordinary contributions, where I found in a file in the archives 440 or 450 condolence letters and messages written to Gandhi about Mahadev from all parts of India. He came here, he did this for us, he brought us in the movement this way, he advised us. I mean, he was the most extraordinary figure, and I hope there is a book on Mahadev by his son, but it's a son's book, it's a devotional book. We need really a brilliant biography of him, because he was, as I said, as important in that period as Nehru, Patel, Bose, etc.
That's incredible. That story needs to be...
Very much needs to be taken.
So, I mean, both about Mahadev Desai and Kasturba, you didn't read much at all. I mean, that's just, I barely mentioned as an asterisk.
So, now there is a young scholar, I won't name her because I wouldn't want to put nazar on her, who's a very good, well-trained young historian who knows fluent Gujarati, who's writing a book on Kasturba.
That's nice.
I'm sure she'll do a very good job because I know her work, I've had discussions with her. And similarly, we need one on Mahadev.
Let's hope some young historians get inspired by this.
Knowledge of Gujarati will be vital for that.
Right. And you would, so the way, I mean, you describe in a lot of it in the book, he comes across as his intellectual equal. It's not secretary, but they're just taking orders and writing letters.
No, intellectual equal, and some ways intellectual, at least in terms of better informed about the world. So Gandhi would not have known what is the impact of the Russian Revolution. What does the rise of Mussolini signify? What does Soviet planning mean for India's economic policies? And Mahadev was completely, familiar with all of this. He was a truly brilliant man, a great man, brilliant man, compassionate man. And really, without him, Gandhi would not have been Gandhi.
See, other thing, which books makes is very clear, which is just the, high school reading of history doesn't tell you at all, is we feel like Gandhi is this, universally revered figure. Everyone's falling in line in worship and Mahatma and all that. But he had so many fierce rivalries,
Yes.
both within Congress, both the country, outside India.
Absolutely.
And it's again, that's other very complicated dynamics. And these guys are, all stalwarts in their own right.
That's right.
And he's just sparring with them intellectually, battle of ideas, but battle of, politics as well.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely. All of these issues on the struggle. What is the best means of taking on the British? Is it violence or non-violence? What is the best mean to attack untouchability within the Hindu social order or outside it? And it's known that Ambedkar felt that Gandhi was going too slow to attack untouchability, but upper caste Hindus thought he's going too fast. I mean, the Hindu orthodoxy, Brahmin priests, heads of great temples, said, who is this Banya who does not know even any Sanskrit? Who is he to tell us how to run our religion, right? Or when emancipation of women was obviously resisted very much by patriarchs in 1925, Sarojini Naidu becomes president of the Congress because Gandhi says we need a woman president. And we're speaking today where in America, Kamala Harris is running for president. Now, she may or may not win. But 100 years ago, in 1925, the Democratic Party of America, which in 2024 has made Kamala Harris the candidate, 100 years ago would not even have had a single member who was a woman. A district council member was a woman. So, and of course, that was resisted here, right? So, yes, he was fighting all these battles. And I think he was fighting them, he was determined. The two or three things. One is he was always open to argument and debate. He sometimes modified his position. Ambedkar changed him, in my view, good and progressive directions. So did the women around him. Like if you look at the Salt March of 1930, he first said only men will participate. And then Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay says that we must also participate and finally agrees. So he was open, but some views he was very deeply passionate about. But when he conducted these arguments, again, this is a lesson for all of us. And I must confess, personally, it's a lesson I've only slowly learned to heed myself. It's when you have an argument, don't be argumentative. Don't be, as one of Gandhi's great admirers, the American civil rights leader John Lewis said, learn to disagree without being disagreeable. His language was always civil. He was non-violent in thought and word and deed. But yes, he had views which he was quite firm about, and he had these critics. And I think it's important to see him in the context of all these critics. And sometimes the critics were right. Sometimes the critics were right, and sometimes he changed his mind about them. And that makes his story so much more interesting. He's not unidimensional.
And other thing that makes his character in the book in some ways even more interesting but also puzzling is while as you said, like in non-violent in thought and action and belief and so on, also simultaneously very overbearing to people who were close to him, which is a big contradiction. And a lot of people paid a lot of toll for just being around him.
That's in the ashram. He was a bit of a tyrant within his inner circle. So he made a distinction between his political disciples and his personal disciples. So Nehru, Patel, Bose, Azad, Kamala Devi, they were his political disciples. So he didn't tell them spin every day, or he didn't tell them be celibate, or he didn't tell them you must also do manual labor. It was enough that they adhered to the Hindu-Muslim harmony, abolition of untouchability, non-violence. But to those in his circle, he was including his own children. I think that's a less appealing part of his life, and the imposition of celibacy. I mean, I think he struggled with his own sexuality. In his own autobiography, he talks about how often he felt that he was having sex with his wife and his father was dying. But to project all of that, I mean, that is, I think, in some ways, his, as you say, his overbearing and at times even tyrannical behavior towards his ashram disciples and his family is the least appealing part of his life.
And maybe the other way to look at this, you may be this great international figure with amazing ideas, etc. But everybody is human also, and when you scrutinize them with a micro lens, all our humanity manifests in all kind of bizarre manner.
Absolutely, Mukesh. And this is not to defend or excuse Gandhi, but if you look at other extraordinary figures, if you look at say the greatest artist, let's say Gandhi was in some ways the most influential, in my view, the greatest, most remarkable political actor of the 20th century. the greatest artist of the 20th century was probably Picasso, and try and examine his, but his artistic achievements, no one could match. The greatest scientist of the 20th century, Einstein. And you look at Einstein's treatment towards his first wife and child. They're so obsessed with what you do, It's to balance the public and the private is something, particularly men. I think women, successful women perhaps are better at, maybe not always, but are probably better at, balancing the personal and the public.
And just going back to the theme of, some of these rivals, one rival is in some ways surprised to find, somehow I had this picture of, with Tagore, he was just, I thought they were like pal, and, just agreed everything and this. But they had a lot of very deep disagreements and even publicly, which talk a bit about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Gandhi learned from them, particularly on, things like the English language, which Gandhi felt was not needed in India. And Tagore explained to him it was a window to the world. I mean, Tagore was the greatest Bengali writer of his time. No one did more for his own language, but he yet needed English to interact with the world. Or on this khadi business, where why ask everyone to spin every day. And at the same time, I mean, they had great affection. And there were things Gandhi did for Tagore which he never talked about. Like when Shanti Niketan was on the edge of financial bankruptcy, he raised money for it and Tagore never knew. So it's a very human relationship. It's a relationship of love, affection, disagreement, divergence. Yes. And it's, in fact, there's a good play also written about it. So in some ways, it lends itself to that.
And like this work, will they like meet often or is it mostly through correspondence?
No, they would also meet. So, for example, Gandhi went to several times to Shantiniketan. And in 1932, when Gandhi was on fast against untouchability in Pune, Tagore traveled all the way. And we're talking about, he was then 70. I mean, at that stage. And if you think of a train journey across India then, you're not getting to his private plane. Going from Shantiniketan to Pune. You take a 36-hour train journey, in the heat and the dust. Because at this time he wanted to be with Gandhi, and he was there when Gandhi broke his fast and he sang. So they had also many letters. Also, I think many letters were exchanged. There's a very good book by Gopal Krishna Gandhi, Gandhi's grandson, who's a very fine scholar. It's called A Frank Friendship. Gandhi and Bengal. His relationship is complicated and a very moving relationship with Tagore and also with Subhash Bose. Subhash Bose also, they disagreed, but after they disagreed and Bose went and started the Indian National Army, in one of his broadcasts, it was Subhash Bose who called Gandhi father of the nation for the first time. Bose died, and of course they disagreed on non-violence, and Gandhi said this. But then in 1946, when Gandhi was in Bihar and Bengal, trying to promote peace between Hindus and Muslims, it was former soldiers of the Indian National Army who were carrying his luggage and setting up his camp. So that book, even Bengali, many Bengalis till today have problems with Gandhi. They say, he sidelined Bose and so on and so forth. And of course, well before Bose, when Gandhi comes back from South Africa in 1915, 16, 17, Bengal is the epicenter of the freedom struggle, and Gandhi shifts it to the west, And in fact, humorous aside, one Bengali historian has even claimed that one of the casualties of Gandhi shifting the epicenter of the freedom struggle to the west of India was that cricket rather than football became India. That is a bit of a stress. But he had a very complicated relationship with Bengal and with Tagore and with Bose. And I think it's and of course he had a relationship with some other provinces too. But with Bengal most of all. I think it's and of course his last one of his great fasts was in Kolkata in September 1947. He tried to learn to read Bengali. But yeah, his relationship with Tagore and Bose is in some ways the most interesting, because with Ambedkar and Jinnah, it is straightforward disagreement. With his followers like Patel and Nehru, it is straightforward affection, love, shared solidarity, comradeship. With Tagore and Bose, it's both empathy, affection, but also debate, disagreement, and divergence.
This brings a different question than just what you just described, triggering it. I think, I don't know exact year, but I think around this time, I think Tagore already won his Nobel Prize for his book. So he must be this towering intellectual figure, world-renowned, and so on. But his role in freedom struggle overall is not that well known, or I don't even know what was his way of navigating.
Interestingly, even when Gandhi was in South Africa, Tagore had sent money for Gandhi's struggle without having them met. Then he gets his Nobel Prize, Gandhi comes back. And so Tagore believed. So Tagore was, he was he's someone who deserves also a really good new biography. I mean, there have been some books on him, but I think he deserves more. So he was both a patriot and an internationalist. He deeply loved his country, but he didn't think that love for his country meant demonizing or hating other countries, whether it be the West or anyone else. He also, unlike the others, a second remarkable thing about Tagore was that he looked west and he looked east. So Nehru goes to England to study. Ambedkar goes to America to study. But Lohia goes to Germany to study. But Tagore also travels in Indonesia, Iran, Burma, Malaysia, and also Argentina, Latin America. So he had a very much more universalist view of the world. And his role in the national movement was more as a preceptor and mentor. So he was not a member of the Congress Party. And I think that's a wise thing. I don't think writers should be members of political parties. That's my view. But he inspired Gandhi, he inspired Bose, he inspired Nehru. In fact, Nehru's internationalism also is inspired by Tagore. And he always insisted, and this is not in this book, it's in other things I've written on Tagore, he always insisted that we must glory in India's diversity. Don't make it, monochromatic. European nations are monochromatic. The French only speak French. The French are only Catholics.
Yeah.
We are not like that, And there are many layers to us, to our society, to our culture, and we should glory in all of them, whatever their linguistic or religious origins. That's this whole idea of India as the palimpsest comes from Tagore. So he is an important secondary figure in Gandhi's life, and he's, of course, endlessly fascinating in his own right.
Yeah. So probably that's a urge for yet one more biography, probably, hopefully as elaborate as this one.
Yeah.
But I mean, he is obviously that.
There have been books on him in Bengali, 4 volumes, 6 volumes. But the thing about, I'd say one last thing I'd say about Tagore, Mukesh, and then we can move on. See, we Indians have a tendency to parochialize our heroes. So the Bengalis have held Tagore so close to him that they have not let the rest of India see his greatness. For many Ambedkarites, Ambedkar is only a Dalit hero, but he is actually much more. Nehru has become the property of the Congress Party. And Tagore was really someone whom other Indians outside Bengal need to know about much better.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a first Nobel Prize winner. I mean, that's such
dimensions. It is so many different things. Anyway.
Right. Yeah, just going back to another interesting thing about Gandhi. I think in the book, as somebody mentioned, in 20s, I think he writes both of his autobiography, if not mistaken. Now a lot of his life work is still ahead of him.
Yeah,
and somewhere I think I don't know whether you mentioned exactly in those words, almost anticipating what the future biographers will write and kind of writing it for them. That is a real deal. So they're not leaving any room for interpretations.
Of course, I've tried to go beyond it, and I say in the first volume of my book that I have to go beyond Gandhi's autobiography because he's written from memory and clearly he's presenting his point of view. I think being in jail helped. Being in jail for long periods helps people write books. So he was in Pune from 22 to 24. He started writing the Satyagraha in South Africa. And then when he finished that, he started his autobiography. And it was serialized, week by week in English and in Gujarati. Mahadev Desai translated the autobiography in English. Gandhi would write it in Gujarati. But he stopped in 1921. He says, after this, my life is public. And I will not... So he's really much richer about his childhood, his family, his marriage, things like that.
And he was, writing pretty much throughout his life. How did his writing evolve? I'm sure you must have, studied a lot of...
Well, I've not studied... Well, I think he was an uncommonly clear writer, Mukesh. There was no jargon, there was no affectation, there was no boastfulness. There's a matter-of-factness to his style. Tagore was a writer, so there's eloquence, there's, imagery, there's metaphor, there's emotion. Gandhi was a very direct, clear writer in English and in Gujarati. But writing is something he did all the time, on railway carriage, in his ashram. And then, of course, from the early 1920s, I think it's 1921, I forget the exact year, he observes a weekly day of silence. So he's just writing, he's just writing, yeah.
Yeah. I think
And he had Mahadev to transcribe and to type.
I've been wanting to do no meeting day for a decade now.
Okay.
Like each week. Still not
No meeting days.
no meeting day. Yeah.
Do it. Yeah.
I know it.
So you have meetings on Sundays also?
I mean, yeah, weekend not counting Sundays, no. But other, 5-6 days, there's something about that. And this is, the problem is not meetings, problem is the interruptions. The quality of thought becomes so shallow and poor.
That's
So continue running from one interruption to another, right?
That's
The moment is like, him again at the time recognizing that for him to gather his thought, having one full day of silence, I'm so appreciated.
And he did it for that. He didn't do it for spiritual reasons.
I have no doubt. I think most leaders today can observe one day of silence and do nobody. Their effectiveness go up, 3x.
I think even a fortnight or even one a month.
Yeah. He just said that. That's the greatness of Gandhi.
Yeah.
Like there was not too much difference between his word and deed, I guess. That's where, probably other thing comes out.
Very much.
Whether you agree, disagree,
It's all there. It's all transparent. Yeah.
right? That's, that's very hard to practice. I think, one of the very senior leaders, they have huge respect for in contemporary India. He says, he's this phrase called say-do ratio. He's saying, my gauge of, like as a leader, I know like what is your say-do ratio. And there's, I know how much I can count. And Gandhi, I think it has to be nearly 100 out of 100.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's going with his political career now. So in 20 some point, there's a chapter in the book was in some ways, he started to take control of Congress in some ways.
Yes.
Without, I don't think he was ever president or he was never
Once.
once. So,
1924. This is
right.
December 24 will be the 100th anniversary of the only time he was president.
So how was that journey? Because that is also, there were a lot of, people with both prestige within Congress, national movement level, people from wealth. So, and all of that, how did he, within 10 years, coming from South Africa, he's now
Not
at the
even 5 or 6 years. So, well, you see, I think those 5 years are so crucial. So he comes back in January 1915. He spends the whole of 1915 traveling around India. So by this time, he knows more about India than his mentor Gokhale. Gokhale, of course, dies in that year. Then he goes to then there are some localized movements he organizes. So there's Champaran, there's the Kheda Satyagraha. So he perfects nonviolence. Then he has the All India campaign, the Roller Satyagraha, and then the non-cooperation movement, and which makes him a national leader. And there's also an element of luck, Mukesh. Luck plays an important role in the journey of individuals. So when Gandhi comes back in 1915, Gokhale is his mentor. And Gokhale is a person of great sagacity, wisdom, but he's not a mass leader. The mass leader is Tilak, who actually was Gokhale's rival in the Congress, and really hugely charismatic person. In fact, he was remembered again quite recently because of the Ganapati festival he started. He was an activist, a writer, a street mobilizer, very popular among the working class. He was also seen as a martyr because the British sent him to jail in Mandalay for several years, and Gokhale was never jailed. And Tilak was the great mass leader. Now, in 1919, when Gandhi launches his Roller Satyagraha, which is his first All India campaign, Tilak is in London fighting a libel case. So there was a libel case that he had filed against a British journalist. So he's away. So the great mass leader is away, and Gandhi becomes a mass leader. Tilak comes back, and in 1920, July, he dies. And as luck turned out, the day Tilak dies, Gandhi was in Mumbai. So he goes to Tilak's house, pays his respects to the dead man, and when the body is taken to the Samsan Ghat, Gandhi is one of the people carrying it. So it's kind of a symbolic, and not that Gandhi was not being cynical, doing it out of admiration for Tilak. But if Tilak had been around, Tilak and Gandhi would have had disagreements on methods, on possibly on Hindu-Muslim harmony, on khadi, on untouchability. But I think, of course, Gandhi had worked very patiently and steadily, in between 1915 and 1920. But Tilak's dying, and sometimes this, to take a later case, which, if Shastri had not died, who knows what would have happened to India, right? I think, we can't. So I think that also helped. But the thing he had done was, in those 5 years, he took control of the Congress. He proved himself through his mass appeal, through his ability to bring the different parts of India together. So Tilak was really a Maharashtrian leader. Gandhi was never a Gujarati leader. Bose was really a Bengali leader. Gandhi was never a could be typecast. Rajagopalachari was a Tamil leader. Gandhi could never be typecast by his regional affiliates. Because he had traveled all across India. His South African experience had brought him in touch with South Indians, East Indians. He was trusted by Muslims, not just by Hindus. And I think that, and he did bring in the vernacular. So the Congress became a mass movement, not just few elites talking about amongst themselves in English. Then from 1920 till the 1940s, he controlled the Congress, basically. He decided who would be president.
Yeah, and as my follow-up question was going to be about that, to what extent, was it, you have to be in some way in his good books, during those 2 decades and somewhat of a disciple or follower or, what's his...
I mean, to other people also, to be fair, I mean, the other people who also were involved, there was a working committee, but and Gandhi was not looking simply at blind loyalty, he was looking at diversity. So he wanted Sarojini Naidu, he wanted a female president. Then he wanted a Muslim president. So M.A. Ansari was made president, and later Maulana Azad. There had to be regional representation from different parts of India. But the Congress credo, which was Hindu-Muslim harmony, abolition of untouchability, non-violence, these 3 things in particular. There were some other aspects to the Congress credo. There was khadi, there was constructive work. But these 3, non-violence, Hindu-Muslim harmony, abolition of untouchability.
These became Congress credo because of Gandhi, right? There was not Congress credo.
No, they became Congress credo because of Gandhi. So before Gandhi and khadi, that was the 4th, which was the least important. But these were the 4, and they became, absolutely, that was Gandhi's philosophy. That was the philosophy, the social and moral philosophy of Gandhi. And became the Congress credo. That, of course, the primary aim, I mean, there was means and there was ends. So the end was winning freedom for India. But the means were, we shall win freedom non-violently. We shall win freedom by taking all religious communities along. We shall win freedom while ending the pernicious practice of untouchability. And we shall win freedom by promoting indigenous enterprise and khadi. So the means were these. The end was, of course, the Congress and other people, the revolutionaries and, of course, people like Aurobindo and so on. So there were others who had stood for Indian independence. But these means to achieve that end were really come from Gandhi and become the Congress credo.
Yeah. And this one, other thing, for which, sometimes Gandhi gets, some criticism also today is not everyone was fully aligned as non-violence is the only means. People had their own views and people are willing to give their lives for it.
Yes.
Where he was sometimes, forget about being sympathetic, sometimes even critical of those people, right? Which is, with the history behind us, that also feels it's not everyone, is happy about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's something actually, I'm working on a book now which will take up Gandhi's and his critics. In this book, I talk a little bit about it. So Gandhi, I think there are 2 or 3 things. One is that Gandhi believed that it was morally wrong to take the life of an innocent people. Even if he's a British officer, by killing him, I assume I'm 100% right, he's 100% wrong. I assume he's incapable of reform. So I think he felt, but also he felt instrumentally it was unwise from an effectiveness point of view. And he was proved right. He said, the British have more arms than you, so they will oppress you. You can't defeat them militarily. One spectacular assassination, and you kill one officer, but then they will come down so heavily on you that ordinary people, Indians in the middle, will suffer. They'll become collateral damage. And finally, I think, let's assume that the revolutionaries, that armed struggle had got India independence in 1920. What kind of independence would it have been? Gandhi believed that if you practice violence to achieve freedom, then you will practice violence on your internal rivals. So we would not have been a democracy. This whole culture of debate, dialogue, would not have been set in place, multi-party competition. Then, of course, the whole program of ending untouchability, bringing women into public life, promoting religious harmony, it required those 2 or 3 decades for all those to become accepted. And then finally, of course, to become part of the constitution. So from a both moral point of view and a pragmatic point of view, these would be Gandhi's arguments.
Got it.
And I'm persuaded by them. I mean, I think that without discounting the heroism of someone like Bhagat Singh, right? And people like him, I think they were fired by the idealism and of youth and the anger and the injustice of the British Empire. But I do not believe they could have brought about a better India than what we don't have a perfect India. today, but we would have been we would have been much worse off. We would have fragmented into many, many parts, and there would have been civil wars all over the place. There would not have been a democratic constitution. There would not have been equal rights for Dalits and women. All that, the Congress through the 20s and 30s and 40s under Gandhi's leadership patiently put into place. So I think history will vindicate Gandhi in all of this.
Yeah, I think that's, I think this one, I'm also just reflecting because there's, one is, you take an action and what is a very long-term consequence of that.
Yeah.
Right? And that's one lens. Other lens is, what is your motivation? And in some ways, all contribution counting, especially if you're willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. And that's where I think people, process and see, and that's the part, I think that's where, it becomes very difficult to,
Yeah, of course.
process
The heroism and courage of people like Bhagat Singh and his comrades are undeniable.
Right.
And Gandhi himself talks about it, and so does Nehru. When you read Nehru's autobiography, he goes to meet Bhagat Singh in jail, and he's deeply moved by it.
Yeah. Just going back to, now, the Gandhi's way of doing things, right? He's also very creative, the things, even before that, one seems, of course, even just almost like a marketing genius, coming up with these symbols, charkha, his glasses, dhoti, this
also the flag.
The flag. 3
colors with the charkha in the middle.
Yeah, this is, rare for just,
I think he had a feel for what moved people. He had a feel for what moved people because he was immersed in the lives of the people from South Africa onwards. He was not just a theoretician, he understood what moved ordinary Indians.
And there was, again, there's, obviously, no mass communication methods available. At best, you have print, which is also very few people can actually read. So he just, it's creativity in coming up, these campaigns one after other relentlessly.
Yeah.
He's also very, very unique. I don't know what is the equivalent of that anywhere in the world in history, right? And something, on the day when, sounds like, this is Champaran or later on, Dandi March.
And that's one. So, for example, just look at his marches. So the first march is in South Africa. I mean, many, people don't know that the first march was in South Africa, which is then my first volume, where he and thousands of Indians break the provincial boundary. The Indians were not allowed to cross from Natal to Transvaal, and he says he'll peacefully break it. Yeah. Now, there are 3 Padayatras he organizes in India. He leads and conceives of. And they each for a different end. So the Salt March is to show the injustice of British rule to the monopoly. So it's really for political freedom. They did the least then that's 1930. 1946-47 is the Padayatra in Noakhali and Bihar for communal harmony. That was reasonably well known. But in between, there's a third Padayatra which has been virtually forgotten, on which there's a full chapter in this book. I think it's called Shaming the Hindus, which is in 33-34. He goes on Padayatra all across. Actually, it is supposed to be all of India, but eventually it is only southern and eastern India, and then it is aborted. So the whole winter he's going from village to village saying untouchability is bad, telling upper caste Hindus that they have to atone for it, collecting money for a fund that will open schools and that are accessible to Dalits, saying that public roads, public wells, you cannot discriminate. And that's all. So this innovation of the march, of the Padayatra, we know about the Salt March. And Attenborough only talks about the Salt March. But there's also a march for communal harmony, there's also a march for social justice, But the same, but the innovation is this, the idea of the march, just going from place to place, connecting with people. And so he is an innovator. I mean, he's an innovator in so many respects that...
other innovation is, fasting as a weapon. It's, it's incredible, how much he was able to move people and mass, with this power of fasting. Incredible fasting abilities also, like 21 day fast was nothing. He would
that's
when needed.
And actually, when he went on several 21-day fasts, one in the 20s for Muslim harmony. The last one was in 1943 when he was in jail, and he was already 70. What do you mean 70 February 73 or something, right? Now, so Churchill, who was Prime Minister of England, was convinced, and Gandhi is in jail fasting, convinced. Churchill started his day with a cigar, and by lunch they had 2 whiskeys, had lots of beef and meat. He just couldn't believe. He told the British The bugger, he didn't say the bugger, this wily old man must be taking glucose. He must be eating on the sly. Find out. He must be eating. He's cheating us. He's not really... So it's hilarious. And I talk about how they could find nothing, that he was just fasting. I mean, he had to stand water. Now, so the disbelief in this Englishman's mind, because Churchill could not even skip lunch one day. Okay. So I think, so the moral courage, the physical courage, it's a 21-day fast. It's like in your early 70s now. It's just amazing. And I can sympathize with Churchill because I also can't skip a meal.
Yeah. We all struggle. I try to do some 24-day fast.
Have you done it?
I've done 24-hour many times. I want to do, 2 or 3 days, but yeah, no courage or, chicken out, thing. It's supposed to be really good for you, especially, once a year, if you do 3-4 day fast. Human body is definitely more than capable of being able to do it. We need something else.
At 73, it's something else.
But how did the idea of, using fast as a weapon, it's also very strange that, that you're getting not only, lot of his adversaries to care about.
Yeah.
That's how often do you see, like, nahi kar raha to, not into your problem.
And sometimes even his associates. So one of his first fast was in South Africa when his son had an affair. And he wanted to shame his son and the girl. So he had a fast in the ashram, which is with the child of his best friend. So, it's... he had that enormous control over him. Again, his marches. If you look at his marches in Bengal, he was in his late 70s and he's marching morning to evening. And it's difficult terrain. It's not easy terrain. It's not like walking in Common Park or something. It's just difficult terrain.
Yeah. As you're going through, all these years and what he was doing and so on, and it's just the things that he was fighting for or fighting against were all in some ways larger than life. At any point, did he feel like dejected? This is just too much, but and kept finding, energies to come.
Yeah, he did feel exasperated. So on all of these issues, so he felt dejected when there were incidents of violence. So like when Chauri Chaura happened and these innocent policemen were set afire by a angry crowd, he felt dejected. He felt dejected when there were Hindu-Muslim riots. He felt dejected when people continued to practice untouchability. He did. But he, somehow gathered himself and he became resolute again. And the most dejected he was in really the last months of his life. Of course, he again, didn't let the dejection completely get him down. And he went on these 2 great fasts, first in Kolkata and next in Delhi, September 47 in Kolkata, January 48 in Delhi, both of which restored peace. But he felt that this is not the freedom we had fought for. So 15th August, he was not celebrating. Unlike Nehru and Patel and everyone else, he was not celebrating. Yeah, of course he did feel. But he knew what his mission was, what his job was, what his duty was. And somehow he gathered his moral and his physical, spirits to carry on.
And let's talk about this whole, the reason why he was not thrilled at the freedom, right? Which it goes back to the heart of the partition. And just retrace that back. I think, so, him and Jinnah were colleagues at Congress. I'm sure Jinnah would have worked under his, when he was a Congress leader, but there were disagreements and so on. So just how was that whole, position unfolded?
I don't think, a slight correction, Jinnah would not have worked under him.
Okay.
Jinnah saw himself as senior to Gandhi.
I see.
Because when Gandhi was in South Africa, so technically Jinnah is about a year younger than Gandhi. He had become a public figure in India much before Gandhi. When Gandhi was an activist in South Africa, only working for the Indian diaspora, Jinnah was a member of the Imperial Council, Imperial Legislature in Delhi. He was debating with the Viceroy and with Gokhale and Tilak. He was, in fact, Tilak's lawyer. So he was much more senior in the Congress, much better known in political circles and public policy circles in India. And also, he was a much more successful lawyer than Gandhi. That also sometimes, you feel that this chap, even in the law, he's failed. And now suddenly he finds in 1920 in Nagpur, which is where Jinnah walks out of the Nagpur Congress. Till then, he's a congressman. He says, this fellow has taken over the whole party and I'm a nobody. And when I rise to speak against him, his tamtas are shouting me down. They say. Now, so Jinnah, it was a personal affront to Jinnah. And this is, this is something, Mukesh, I will not take names, but you will see it. I have seen it close up. It's a very male thing. So a male who is powerful regards somebody else in his own organization as a junior. And that junior supersedes him, becomes more celebrated, more famous, more influential. They don't take it well. So I think there is some of that in Jinnah. And that is always that he was senior to Gandhi. He was better known than Gandhi. He was a more successful professional than Gandhi. He was breaking bread with the viceroy when Gandhi was just a sidey in South Africa, right? And then Gandhi becomes the major figure in the Congress, and I think so there is a deep personal rivalry that Jinnah has with.
So Jinnah leaves Congress in 20s.
20, yeah. And then he, of course, then starts doing only his own work, and then he goes to London, and then he's persuaded to come back and by the Muslim League in 34, and then he builds it up, and of course then he becomes the Muslim alternative to Gandhi.
But I'm guessing they must still be in touch throughout those 2 decades.
Not really. No, from 20 to 30 is not in touch. And it's also possible that if not Gandhi's advisors underestimated Jinnah, because in the 20s, many more Muslims followed the Congress than the Muslim League, followed Gandhi than Jinnah. But by the late 30s, that had kind of changed. Right? So there must have been some element of underestimation also, including by Nehru and by Patel. So there is that deep personal rivalry that is part of this. And it's mostly on Jinnah's side. I think Jinnah does feel, as I said, you will find, you see it in corporate life. You see it in sport, that somebody is very celebrated and someone from nowhere comes and, becomes more of a shining star. So powerful and successful men take being overshadowed rather badly. And Jinnah's, I think that plays into Jinnah's determination to get even with Gandhi, to build an organization, the Muslim League, that at least is taken as seriously by the British, even if it does not have the mass following of the Congress. It has the same capacity to influence political decisions, and that hence it animates his desire and the desire of his colleagues in the League to create their own nation.
Other thing I noticed in the book, which I was not aware of, I think it was 1928, when both Motilal Nehru and Jawaharlal Nehru were potential candidate for being the Congress president, That's a pretty interesting year, both.
So I think Motilal Nehru is in 28, the candidate is president, and Jawaharlal succeeds him.
Right.
So there's a kind of father to son transition.
And those I'm imagining, given the age difference, so on, Motilal must be a much more prominent leader.
But Nehru had already become the darling of the youth, by then. So he had been very active in, the agitation of the Simon Commission. He started writing. But yes, that is the kind of, sense, it's a sort of dynastic succession. Yeah.
Got it. And then just the reason I'm bringing it up, I want to fast forward to I think in mid-40s.
Yeah.
See this, again, my understanding of history is, the idea of Pakistan wasn't a very big prominent theme in 20s and 30s, probably 30s onwards.
Correct.
Started to gather some steam.
Early 40s,
right?
Yeah.
So very, happened very quickly, very fast.
That's it.
And this must have come as I guess did come as a, big shock to Gandhi. It looks like he spent most of his 40s fighting against it. In the
Correct.
process, probably managed to just piece off nearly everybody, for...
So I think, what it happened very quickly. So, in 1940, in 1937, there are elections and the Congress wins 7 out of 9 provinces. In UP, the Muslim League at that stage wanted to be in coalition with the Congress. And the Congress was too arrogant. They said, no, we'll run it. Because they had a majority, we'll run it on our own. But then in 1940, 1939, the war breaks out. The Congress ministries resign because, this is described in great detail in my book, that Gandhi and Nehru tell the viceroy, we will join the war effort. Gandhi even says, I will not, my commitment to non-violence is personal, but Indians can join the army, fight against Hitler and the Nazis because they are a great menace to world peace. But in return for our helping the British in their war effort, you must promise us independence when the war ends. That is what the Congress tells the viceroy, and the viceroy says no, because the viceroy thinks, like an old reactionary, that the British will be here forever. So the Congress ministries resign in protest. And then in 1940, Jinnah, the idea of Pakistan is promulgated at the Muslim League conference in Lahore, And then in 42, there is the Quit India movement. So everyone is jailed. Nehru, Patel, Gandhi, Azad, every major Congress leader is in jail. And 41, 42, 43, the Muslim League is free to canvass support, to build its cadres, to take its propaganda all over. and the idea of Pakistan is gathering ground while all the congressmen are in jail. So this is the endless debate among historians. Was it unwise to have a Quit India movement in retrospect, because it strengthened the Muslim League and Jinnah's hand? And it also made Jinnah much closer to the British, because the Muslim League and Jinnah was supporting the war effort, sending hundreds and thousands of Muslim soldiers to fight. And by the time Gandhi had launched, and the Congress had launched a Quit India movement, they had actually, if anyone they had pissed off, it was the Viceroy and the British. Because here the British were in England with their backs to the wall, with the German planes invading, and here is the Congress under Gandhi and Nehru and Patel fighting against them. So in that case, so it's a complicated business. I mean, but it's something where it's very, it's always easier in hindsight to pass judgment.
Yeah.
If the Viceroy had been wise enough to say, yes, we will, because if you're fighting, the war is fought for democracy against freedom. What about freedom and democracy for the colonized people? That is the argument of the Congress. It's a very logical argument. But I think that is the 46 elections which are held, and where the Muslim League sweeps all the Muslim seats. And by that time, January, February, partition was inevitable. People claim it could have been stopped, and some romantics think that Gandhi could have. Gandhi offered. It is true, Gandhi offered Jinnah the prime ministership, but Jinnah didn't want to accept it because his party would have been in a minority in the assembly, whereas he was now sure he would get his own country. So partition could have been avoided maybe in 37, 38, 39, but maybe even in the early 40s. But so it became, one last thing I'd say about partition. I mean, as a historian, my judgment is by about 39, by 40, 41, partition was kind of the logic of history.
But Gandhi didn't give up, right? He spent a lot of time.
Of course, he did his utmost to try and stop it. So I'll say two things. One is that it's unlikely that partition could have been stopped, but it could have been handled much better. Mountbatten rushed it, and the terrible casualties, the probably 1.5 to 2 million people who died, and 8 to 10 million people. I mean, these are rough estimates. No one has, concrete, reliable figures. But probably 1.5 to 2 million people who died, and probably 10 million refugees. Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims, all sides suffered equally. That's very much of this could have been. At least the numbers would have been much less if Mountbatten had handled it better, if he had staggered it out, if he had taken the advice of his advisors and posted the police in the right places. And of course, but Gandhi resisted it. Gandhi said, one, I will try my best to stop it. And once he failed, he said, nonetheless, even if Pakistan is a Muslim state and a homeland for Muslims, India will not be a Hindu state, and Muslims who stay back in India out of their own choosing will get equal rights. And I will fast or march or plead or for their equal rights. But yes, I mean it's a terrible, of course. Some things in retrospect are easier to solve than they were at the time, because events are moving so fast. I mean, there's a world war. There's an unfeeling, uncaring viceroy who doesn't understand the legitimacy of the Indian demand for independence. There's Jinnah, who's determined to get even with Gandhi and is building his organization. The Congress people are in jail, and the Muslim League activists are free to, build up their base. So in retrospect, yes, you could have said Gandhi should have done something different, Nehru should have done something different, Patel should have done something different. But it's only in retrospect you can say that.
Yeah, other, very, from India's point of view, more tragic figure in some ways, Churchill also, right? And on one hand, he's seen this defender of freedom and democracy and all of that. But his views on India were pretty absolute and,
absolutely horrible.
Totally believed in the,
awful. He was an unreconstructed imperialist. He actually wanted Gandhi to die in jail. He did very little during the Bengal famine. In fact, the viceroy who had succeeded in Lilith Go had been succeeded in 43 by Wavell. And Wavell asked for a food aid, which never came. So some people think Churchill is a war criminal, and the death of 2 million people in the famine of Bengal, Orissa, Bihar of 43 should be attributed to him. Even if he is not a war criminal, he was certainly indifferent to the plight of those people. So his record in India is terrible. And not only that, in India after Gandhi, I talk about this. After India got independence and partition happened, so in August, India and Pakistan became two separate countries. There was still the problem of the princely states. And Churchill was intriguing with the Nizam of Hyderabad so that British would try and keep Hyderabad independent and not join India. Now imagine if Hyderabad had not joined India, it would have been we could never have had an independent country. We could never have had economic progress we've had, because, as Sardar Patel said, Hyderabad was a cancer that was running across India. And the Nizam, in his bid for independence, was being held by Churchill and the Conservatives. So Churchill's record on India, he shows him to be a vicious, petty, narrow-minded, racist man. At the same time, he was a great defender of his country. That's also true. We have to hold these two apparently contradictory truths. They're both true. They're both true about Jason.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, there's some of these people who play outsized role in history. I mean, they have often many sides.
That's true.
And depend on where you look.
Churchill was the great savior of Britain and a vicious racist and imperialist when it comes to India.
And probably
both are true.
Contribute to massive damage, in many ways, one thing, but overall whole entire, this decade of 40s could have turned out maybe differently.
It could have. At least there would have been less suffering. I'll give you one example. Again, when you're talking about when could partition have been avoided, in 1942, April, let's go back to, in 1940, Churchill becomes Prime Minister. Now that just as today in India, you have the Congress and the BJP as the two major national parties, bitter rivals, right? There you had the Conservatives in the Labour Party. The Conservatives are opposed to Indian independence. Labour Party was committed to Indian independence. In 1940, because Britain was fighting Hitler and the Nazis, Labour and Conservatives joined in a national government. So it's like the BJP and the Congress, for whatever reason, if there's a big national crisis, having a national government. And in that national government, Churchill was Prime Minister. But the Labour ministers included Attlee and Cripps, who were close to Nehru, and Cripps actually admired Gandhi. And meanwhile, as I said, the Congress had said, we will join the war effort so long as you promise us independence. So in April 1942, Cripps comes out, who is a Labour minister, sympathetic to the Congress, but working under Churchill. And he meets the Viceroy, who's still in Litco, who's a bit of a reactionary like Churchill. And he meets all the Congress leaders. He also meets the League leaders. And the Congress says, Maulana Azad was then president of the Congress, and with Gandhi's approval, he says, we will join the war cabinet, Indian cabinet, in the Viceroy's Executive Council. We'll have ministers, or what they were called executive councillors. Ambedkar was already there in that council, from the Muslim League and the Congress. And we will work under the Viceroy to fight the Nazis and fight the Japanese, who are actually as bad, as horrific as the Nazis in terms of their war crimes. But the war member, that is like the defense minister, must be an Indian. Because we are defending our country. We are giving you the troops. We will mobilize the troops. But you can have the finance member can be an Englishman if you want, and but the war member was an Indian. And the Viceroy, probably with Churchill, says, we can't trust these Indians to run an army. And it breaks down on that. So, on that issue, if they had agreed to have an all-party cabinet with the Muslim League members and the Congress members, but with an Indian as the defense minister, there would have been no Quit India movement, and maybe there would have been no partition, because then the Muslim League and the Congress would have been working with the British to defeat, the Axis powers. So, I think Churchill and Lithgow could not imagine an Indian, a brown man, having the courage or the military wisdom to be defense minister. So it's pure racism. At that stage, partition became inevitable, because when that happened, Gandhi and the Congress said, we have to launch Quit India. So that would have stopped Quit India. If they had agreed to an Indian, and I'm sure they could have found a capable Indian, to have been, Patel could have been a war member or someone else, but they just said no.
Yeah, sometimes the march of history is like staring in the face, but people, because of their biases and bigotry, just refuse to acknowledge it, right? And cause, unnecessary damage. And then, India gets, we get, our independence, and shortly thereafter, Gandhi dies, and, and a lot of things happen, we'll not go into it, and you have a whole book on that as well. But now fast forward to today, and in some ways, Gandhi continues to be fascinating character, continues to be divisive also, continues to be controversial as well, and so on. What are your words to maybe younger generation, people who have very little idea, maybe they only learn about Gandhi from Twitter and some extremists.
So my words to the younger generation would be, listen to this conversation and the one before that, if you liked it. Pick up my 2 books, because you'll get lots of rich detail. and based on decades of research, and it's a work of scholarship. It's not an ideological work, it's a work of research and scholarship. And I'm actually now working on a sequel, which should take a few years to complete, which is taking the story of Gandhi, not of India, of Gandhi from 48 till today, and how he's been seen around the world. So the afterlife of Gandhi, including criticisms of him, which come from come from the right, come from the left, come from Hindu radicals, come from Dalit radicals, come from Marxists. And of course, there are many people who admire and follow Gandhi across the world. The environmental movement recognized Gandhi as a great icon and inspiration, so does to some extent the women's movement, the civil rights movement. So I'll be talking about Gandhi's contested legacy and how he's still alive in people's minds, either as a figure of appreciation or as a figure of denunciation. So I don't want to, I'm still working my way through this, but it's a fascinating topic. That how is it that, nearly 8 decades after he died, people still discuss him and his legacy. But in terms of his own life and his friendships, his rivals, the historical circumstances in which he worked, I hope at least some of your listeners will be persuaded to pick up my books.
No, amazing. I think your, kind of commitment to scholarship, around Gandhi and bringing his life story, it very nuanced detail and is just fascinating. And also just as a project, even leaving Gandhi aside for a second, just picking a topic, Ram, and then going so deep over multiple decades. And that itself, and that shows in the quality. I mean, I enjoyed reading both books. I think I've nearly read them both twice. I will obviously highly recommend it. I think you learn so much, not about Gandhi, but about so many other characters also, right? Including the people who are not known at all.
Yeah.
You understand, how complex the entire freedom struggle was, but also in many ways how much it was ahead of its time. So many things that happened, including mentioned Sarojini Naidu in 1925.
Yeah.
Many other things, very progressive.
Yeah.
US, the universal franchise only happened in the 60s.
Exactly.
Managed to get there in the 40s, and the seeds of that were sown much before that, right? A lot of these ideas.
Yeah.
So I think as, today, for good reason, a lot of us feel very proud of, where overall the country is headed. But I think, understanding life of Gandhi and what happened around that is a good window into, people who have desire to understand, the history of India in deeper detail. And, I want to just thank you for doing all the work to make it easy for people like me to be able to go through it and learn so much from this, colorful history. Thank you.
Thank you, please.
At SparX, we aim to bring to you stories of exponential impact. We share in-depth analysis of what goes behind success stories. If you find our conversations interesting, you can join us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to SparX on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any other audio platform of your choice. If you have any suggestions on who we should invite or what topics we need to cover, just let us know in the comments. We are always listening, looking for ways to improve, and keep getting better as we go along.